So it's my pleasure to welcome everybody and our great panel to this webinar called Building Digital Resilience in the Nonprofit Sector. As I mentioned, we just launched the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience yesterday. And so you're our first public audience with this content. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Victor Beausoleil, Amy Sample Ward, Chantal Edwards, and Narinder Dhami. My name's Liz Weaver, and I'm the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute. And so it is really our pleasure to have such a great panel joining us today. I'm going to give you just a little introduction about each of our panelists, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about the work that they are leading with their respective organizations when we get into the question part of this webinar. So Victor is with the organization that is called Social, oh my goodness, Victor, I'm looking at your bio, Social Economy Through Social Inclusion. I refer to it as SETSI, which lots of other folks refer to it as well. Victor has a pretty impressive bio. He, at the age of 24, he co-founded the Redemption Reintegration Services, one of the largest youth-led youth justice agencies in Canada. In 2013, he was appointed to the Premier's Council on Youth Opportunities in Ontario. Victor has worked diligently in the broader equity seeking communities across Canada for the past 19 years and is currently the executive director of SETSI, Social Economy Through Social Inclusion. The next panelist I want to introduce is Chantal Edwards. Chantal is the public policy analyst at Imagine Canada. In her current role, she aims to develop policy recommendations that strengthen the operating environment for Canadian charities and nonprofits. Chantal is the lead at Imagine Canada's digital innovation policy, so really relevant to what we're going to be talking about today, and currently represents Imagine Canada as one of the founders on the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. Amy, so I'm going to introduce Amy next. So Amy is driven by the belief that technology should be accessible and accountable to everyone, especially communities historically and systemically excluded from the digital world. And Amy is the author, the co-author of a book that has been recently published and is sitting on my bookshelf. And maybe when we talk to you, Amy, will hear a little bit more about that book. Amy is currently a lead at NTEN, and their prior experience in direct service, policy, philanthropy, capacity building organizations has fueled Amy's work to create meaningful inclusion and compassionate community engagement and educational opportunities for organizations around the world. And this is really through your leadership, Amy, at NTEN that has been very impactful. And we'll hear a little bit more about NTEN a little bit later. And then our final panelist is Narinder Dhami. And so Narinder, Canada Top 40 Under 40 2019 honoree, has worked across sectors, and silos, bringing depth, perspective, and rigor to her work in North America and the Global South. She is president of the Sonor Foundation, executive lead at New Power Labs, managing partner at Marigold Capital, and an advisor in the Justice Fund. And so you can see from our panelists that we have a really broad depth of skills, experiences, and perspectives that they're bringing to this work of building nonprofit digital resilience. And so we'll hear from them in a couple of minutes. Before we go to our panelists, though, we wanted to engage you in a poll. So one of the areas that in the building of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, we we're looking at, the key factors that are challenging nonprofit organizations in terms of their digital capacity. And so these were factors that were identified through research from other partners. And we'd love to be able to have you weigh in about which of these is a challenge that your organization is currently facing. So Grace, if we could bring up the poll, perfect. There we go. So please weigh in. This will give our panelists a little bit of insight as to who is in our virtual room and what challenges you're facing. So we can see that it's tipping between people, data, process. So those are some of the big challenges. I don't know, Amy, Chantal, can you see the poll as it's moving forward? Or are you just waiting for the results? Okay, you're just going to wait for the results. So we're about 61% at this point. So maybe give people one more minute. Great. We're just getting into. We're just hitting quite, just a little bit over 100 people have responded now. I'm sure, I know it was a forced choice poll. I'm sure that many of you who are responding to the poll could pick a number of these options, not just one of the options, but so I'm going to close the poll now and we can see the results. Can our panelists see the results? Okay, great. So you can see that there is a little bit of a mix, but certainly process seems to be one where 22% of respondents are saying that they're having challenges, that's a significant challenge, and then navigating data. And then I think the third one is people and capacity. And I think, there was a recent article that was published by CIRA in Canada that kind of brought out some of these challenges as well. Amy, just before we go into the questions, maybe bring you in very quickly. Is this similar? Are these poll results similar to what you see at NTEN in terms of the work that you do?
Definitely. I wasn't surprised to see process so high because process is in a way like the piece that enables all those other answer options to fit into their place, right? NTEN recently did a survey, so not like statistically correct across every country, but in that survey we were talking about, do folks even know how technology decisions are made in the organization? Because if not every staff person knows how the decision is made, there's no way for everyone in the organization to know they were correctly a part of it, right? And you can tell by the way I'm bringing this up that the answer was not great. A lot of people do not know, and it is not fully understood across all staff how technology decisions are made. So I just offer that as validation that this is really ringing true from where we sit kind of across the sector, that it isn't just one thing and it isn't just one decision. It's how we do all of this work that is holding us back from a lot of success.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That's I think that's helpful to see in the context of other research that is out there. So before we get into our questions, we also want to just give everybody a bit of a backgrounder on the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. We've got a couple of slides just to share with you. So you can see that the folks on the call, Victor, Chantal, and Amy, are part of the incubator group, and Narinder and the Sonor Foundation are an early investor in the development of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And I also wanted to acknowledge our colleague, Katie Gibson, who is with the CIO Strategy Council, who wasn't able to be with us today. They've been pretty instrumental in the design and the thinking and the development of the center. And Katie had a birthday today, so we wish her happy birthday, but we gave her release from being on the webinar today. We know through our research and through lots of things that we've read, and certainly that Amy and Victor and others have brought to the table, is that, you know, that we do need to future-proof the nonprofit workforce. And so that that process and people piece that you just spoke to, Amy, I think is this slide really just speaks to that as well. And we also know that technology is a driver for our work, but that investment, particularly in the nonprofit digital resilience area and in the Canadian context, is low. And so there has to be a kind of a collective case made for increasing investment. And that was one of the reasons that spurred on the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience and the interest of so many folks that have already stepped up as founders, advisors, and organizations that are in the center currently and helping to frame the work that's going forward. Also, everybody on the call, the reason I think you're on this call is that you want to learn more about building nonprofit digital resilience. And this is the hard truth, right? That if we don't do something collectively, we know that nonprofits in Canada, in the US, and globally will fall further and further behind. And we certainly have learned lots of lessons from NTEN, but also from global examples in Australia and the UK as well. So this is the core of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. We really see ourselves as convening organizations, so to convene folks from diverse sectors, to have folks that are engaged with the center to identify and prioritize initiatives that they're interested in or they're struggling with, or they want to move the needle on, both at their own organization, but also at a systems kind of level. So a little bit of both. And then to really be able to mobilize funders and resource holders in a purposeful way to advance the digital capacity of nonprofits so that they can better deliver on their mission and their impact. So digital resilience is an enabler to being able to deliver on your mission and your impact. The structure is fairly horizontal. So we've got some co-founders, we have a significant number of advisors who have already jumped on board, and it is an invitation to folks on the call, if you're interested, to certainly visit the website and jump on board either as an advisor or a supporter, an organization. The more folks are engaged with this, the more you can help define the agenda going forward. These are the, as you could tell by our survey, these are the initial areas that we feel will be focus areas for the work in the short term. And the intent is to look across the folks that have that are going to be doing this work with us in partnership with the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience to identify the priorities. And we hope to launch some working groups in the very near future based on individual organization and individual priorities. So that gives you just the really quick thumbnail sketch about CCNDR. Now we're going to turn it to the experts that we have in the room, and we've got some questions for our panel. I'd also, if you're joining us for this webinar as a learner, we would invite you to put questions into the Q&A part of the Zoom client as well. And we have some time at the end of the R section to invite those questions in. So please feel free to do that, to put them either in the chat box or in the Q&A panel. So I'm going to start with you, Victor. I want you to tell us a little bit about SETSI, and then maybe speak to us about why SETSI is so interested in this work and signed up as a founding partner.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz, and my colleagues for all the hard work on the center, and definitely happy birthday to Katie. I give thanks to my ancestors for another opportunity to share and build and contribute. My name is Victor Beausoleil, and SETSI is about all things social innovation. So social economy, social finance, social procurement, social acquisitions, the cooperative movement in Canada, and impact investing. And we do a lot of work around inclusion, diversity, equity, and access to create a sense of belonging so that no Canadian is left behind. So the folks in the margins and the periphery of the economy have meaningful and sustainable opportunities. The reason why, and the question is, why did SETSI become a founding partner of the Canadian Center for Nonprofit Digital Resilience? It was straightforward to us. It was about anti-Black racism in the nonprofit sector. We believe that the gap between mainstream stakeholders and Black-led nonprofits has been growing. And the unfunded reports, I actually put in the chats, clearly articulated some of these challenges. As well, we identified a systemic failure of the nonprofit establishment to operate from a place of solidarity. We believe that digital resilience leads to data sovereignty. Technology needs to be accessible and support equity. And the folks that collect, steward, govern, and disseminate data wield power. And data can be used as a tool to support diversity, equity, inclusion, or can be weaponized. So this was really important to us. So at SETSI, we wanted to be intentional, intellectually vigorous, relate to how tech can be used to amplify belonging, how power and privilege intersect in the nonprofit sector, and unpacking underdevelopment in the nonprofit sector led by broader equity-seeking groups, because a lot of times things can be Black themed or led by peoples of African descent. There's a difference between having a thematic approach to governance, decision-making, because it's bigger than engagement when it comes to community development work. It's about representation and meaningful representation. So we want to ensure that BIPOC communities who are historically excluded and traditionally not engaged in a meaningful way were at the table and had a seat at the table from a place of, once again, belonging, not begging, not having to bring our own chair, and really trying to show that equity is not about pie. You know, once you become more equitable, the rooms get bigger, the plates get bigger, the views get better. And the fact that trickle down and pro-growth theories of development in the nonprofit sector leave people behind sometimes. So at SETSI, recognize that many communities are in a space of forced resilience, resilience under duress. And when I saw the work of this empowering group, Katie, Amy, Chantal, Kathy, Liz, like the entire team, the folks in Imagine Canada, it was just obvious to me after weeks of, actually months of work, that we had to just continue to advance this cause. So this center is extremely important to SETSI, and I'm excited to continue to support and contribute in any way that I can. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Victor. I'm particularly interested in the comment that you made around data and data ownership. And just thinking about that within the context of the Canadian Centre, what are some of both the challenges that we might face or that we're facing currently in Canada, and maybe some of the opportunities by really broadening the base of engagement, you know, around the data conversation?
I think knowledge mobilization, like myself and Katie met. So SETSI, we're working on an initiative around decolonizing data. And Katie and I met through Capital W and the remarkable work that she was doing with the team over there. And when I look at, so for instance, if you look at the disbursement quota conversation, there's over 85,000 charities in Canada. There's only 120 submissions to the Ministry of Finance. So that shows the lack of capacity in the sector to engage in a process. When you look at how stats can and census can and multiple government ministries interact with each other in terms of how they share data, there's echo chambers, there's silos, and those silos impact everyone. When you look at the long form, when you look at the T30, there's so many processes that we can gather data to benefit all Canadians, but we don't have the systems, processes, or the tools, or sometimes we have the tools, but the tools are not being used in a way that actually stewards and cultivates a place of belonging or enables a regulatory environments or environments where folks aren't left behind. So I could definitely talk about this for a lot longer, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. I think that's a really, that's the kind of conversation that we hope to enable around the larger CCNDR tables. Thank you for that, Victor. We'll go to Imagine Canada and to Chantal. So Chantal, we heard in your bio that you are leading the policy thinking at Imagine Canada around nonprofit digital resilience. So what do you see from a policy lens about some of the barriers and the opportunities?
Thanks, Liz. That's a great question. In October, I spoke to over 31 charities and nonprofits about the use of digital technologies in organizations. And we published that work in a report called Voices of the Sector, Remarks from Canadian Charities and Nonprofits on Digital Innovation and Transformation. So I'll highlight 3 of the main barriers that we found. The first barrier was a lack of funding. Stakeholders that we spoke to expressed that there was limited access to funding opportunities to purchase technology and to hire staff and other experts to use and implement that technology. The high cost of technology was also mentioned as another barrier. Charities and nonprofits often receive project-based funding, which allows them to only invest in technologies needed for a specific program or project, but not the entirety of the organization. When purchasing technologies for the organization, charities and nonprofits aren't investing in the best-in-class technologies, but they're purchasing the technologies that they can afford with the funds that they have. The last barrier that stakeholders identified was a lack of training and education. Stakeholders expressed a lack of knowledge surrounding how various digital technologies and software interacted. This was important because it prevented organizations from developing integrated technology systems. Seeing some of those barriers, I'll also highlight some of the opportunities stakeholders identified. The first opportunity was small-scale grants. The pandemic increased access to unrestricted funding to support investments in technology. Going forward, there's an opportunity for foundations and governments to emulate those funding models to support the digital innovation or the digital infrastructure that the sector needs. Secondly, I see an opportunity for training and education to bridge the educational gaps surrounding digital technologies and softwares in the sector. And then lastly, there's an opportunity to build the digital awareness among funders, nonprofits, and charities surrounding the technologies needed to run a charitable or nonprofit organization and the types of technologies that funders are willing to support.
Really interesting, the 3 themes, the 3 barriers that came up. And I think, you know, if we want to achieve the vision that Victor proposed around more equitable access around data sharing, there is a piece of the work around what are the platforms, the various platforms that folks are using, and then how can you, if the platforms are so different, how can you even begin to data share or to, you know, share those resources? And probably Amy's found that to be a challenge that has, you know, has been one that NTEN has had to navigate as well. Yeah, thank you, Chantal. We'll go to you, Narinder. So what motivated the Sonor Foundation to invest in the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience? And also, what are some of the trends and patterns that you see as a funder?
Thank you for that question. It's really great to be here and thrilled to be able to support the work of the center. So, a few things in the background is I'm an electrical engineer. So I've always had, you know, a view that enabling technology can do tremendous things when used effectively within organizations and across the sector. And so that has defined kind of at least my viewpoint. The foundation, the Sonor Foundation, is a private family foundation. We've been around since 1979, you know, take an approach of funding with really no restrictions. It's about supporting the infrastructure of organizations. It's about supporting fundraising. It's about supporting technology. It's really driven by the needs of the organization. So that's always been a mindset for us. So I think what the center is doing is enabling those within the broader sector who are trying to navigate how to get from where they are today and get that infrastructure and advance on their systems and tools, help them through that path and that journey. And so for us, it made a lot of sense. building the broader infrastructure. Now, I've also had, and Amy and I briefly worked together in another hat I used to wear, which was a consultant to Okta for Good, a great organization out in Canadian office, but also US based home base. And technology infrastructure is core to the way they give and the way they work. So I had a chance to work with Amy and others. I think I see some folks on the call as well about how do we build that infrastructure? How do we support funders around their journey of deploying capital in ways that are enabling and that support technology? So all of that has helped to inform the way we work at Sonor Foundation. And what I'm seeing is still a big gap between those organizations, and Victor touched on this, those organizations that have access to the resources to implement technology and systems and those that don't. And that does have a lens on who's running them, how big the organizations are. And so when we think about closing the equity gap, we need to close the technology infrastructure gap as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, Narinder, that there's also what we heard earlier on in when we did the poll and when Amy weighed in a little bit at the poll, is that there's also a mindset shift around this that is required, right? That in the sector, we really have to think about, technology as, the wholeness of technology, right? Within our staff team, who's part of the decision-making process, all of those kinds of things. Would you think about that?
Well, we're actually, my colleague Jerry is in the room as well. And another hat I wear is I'm the executive lead of New Power Labs, and we're looking at equitable capital flows across all types of diversity that make up Canada, and all types of capital, from philanthropy to venture capital to impact investing and so forth. And we're a young team, we're a young nonprofit. So what we're doing as a team is doing that system mapping on what do we need, kind of what type of automation, what type of systems, and really engaging everyone. When we're a small team, we're a team of 5 now, but that kind of collaborative work where we can really understand opportunities for our workflows, for our processes, for data collection to be improved. We're taking a very intentional approach to putting that in place, and as a team, so we all have ownership and ultimately use it, and then can win on the efficiency and effectiveness that comes from that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, thinking about it from a whole of organization approach, I think is really helpful at Tamarack. One of the things that we do with our team is for our CRM vendor, everybody has to have training so that they can go into the CRM, utilize the data and inform their work by, our members who are sitting in the CRM, really making sure that it's active. So yeah, really, really interesting. Okay, so we're going to go to NTEN, to you, Amy. So the 2 questions for you. First, to tell us a little bit more about NTEN's focus and priorities. And then also for you to maybe dive, you gave us a little bit of an appetizer in some of the challenges, but maybe a little bit deeper dive in some of the challenges.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for setting this up. NTEN is, I'm just going to say now, people always ask if the letters stand for anything. We're just like, so cool. They don't even stand for anything, just NTEN. But NTEN was formed in 2000, so 22 years ago. And if you think back to the late 90s, what technology in nonprofits was like, the world was very different, not even everyone had a computer at their desk necessarily, it was very different, but there were hundreds of folks from Canada, US, UK, Australia, who saw the potential of what technology could do for nonprofit work and missions, and started co-organizing themselves. And that group of hundreds of community members from across countries formed NTEN as a convener to continue making sure that learning and collaborations could happen. NTEN's mission is to ensure that any movement, any mission can actually be successful, like truly go out of business. The world is better because folks are able to use technology both in equitable and strategic ways. So NTEN, we don't focus on any products. We don't recommend products. like TLDR, they're all problematic. We need better ones anyway. Instead, we really focus on the process, the decision-making, the budgeting. What do you do with the technology you have? You know, just more or more expensive or newer tech doesn't really do anything if you don't know what you're trying to do. So NTEN's work at that intersection of equity and strategy with technology really has meant a lot of different programs come up. We don't have a specific mission area, a specific geography, a specific job type. Everyone is welcome and included in our programs. So we have people of every job type, you know, every mission type from Canada, US, all around the world. I think 134 different countries. Our most recent professional certificate earner just like 2 days ago is from Nigeria, and staff were celebrating and sending them a welcome package. And as far as challenges, you know, I think there's very different conversations happening across all sectors about what equity actually means. And equity for whom. You know, a lot of those conversations still center white staff or white leaders in framing what equity means. And NTEN's approach is to honor self-determination, and that changes what a data conversation or a data ownership conversation is when you focus on self-determination, right? It changes what it looks like to say, how do you teach someone something? If you are really truly honoring that participant is telling you what they want to learn versus you are telling them what they will learn, right? And as we shift those conversations and evolve them together as collaborators here, but also as a sector, that is what's really exciting to me, because I think it opens up this idea of digital challenges into real opportunities for organizations to be successful, to be effective, to really truly build trust and relationship with their communities. So I could talk for a long time, but as far as solutions, I think, you know, something that's really exciting to me about the center and the opportunity for so many organizations to collaborate in this way is that we don't need to spend our time creating new organizations that have to like have an office and have all these staff. We can just say, hey, today, let's start collaborating. Let's make sure that as solutions rise up in one place, we share them and distribute them, that we're learning together. We are always stronger together. And the forces that try to silo us or make us feel like we're in competition, like those are not our forces. You know, that's like capitalism and white supremacy. So we can leave those at the door and just like show up and learn together. And I think the practice of us doing that across organizations also ripples into how we practice that inside our own organizations, right? And we can really make change in that way. A resource related to all of this that I thought I would just drop in the chat is the equity guide for nonprofit technology that a few dozen community members all put together over the course of a couple of years, and is, I think, an interesting jumping off point for a lot of further conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit about you, a couple of slides that we took from the slide deck. So I wonder if you want to just give us a couple of comments about this.
Sure. And sorry for not knowing that you were going to put these up. I'm
No,
sure you
it's
told
okay.
me and I didn't remember / read. Sure. So Tech Accelerate is a free assessment tool. It's available in French and English and Spanish, and it is built actually off of 10 years of research in Canada and the US and beyond around how organizations were, you know, spending and budgeting on technology, but also staffing and processes. And it provides a full kind of evaluation across your organization. Again, not specific to products, but, you know, how are you making those decisions? Where is your data stored? All of those types of questions. And you get a prioritized report that shows you areas in the highest risk, as well as, you know, ways for you to learn more about different topics, especially if you scored low on a certain question because it's something you don't know as much about. So resources in there, as well as kind of a ready to go report on where to prioritize your work.
So it's like an assessment that anybody who's on the
Yep.
call, their organization can go in and do and get a kind of
Yep.
a
And you can even
latest
have multiple
evaluation.
staff, you know, collaborate on one assessment. You don't need to just know all the answers yourself. But we've heard from a lot of folks that they actually put the assessment up in their staff meetings and have discovered it as a way of surfacing where there is, you know, maybe different understandings of things across an organization, or different teams thought the answer was a different thing. And that in itself is a great opportunity to better align across the team.
Great. And then here are just some other resources that NTEN provides. This is just for everybody else. I won't have you go through it, but when you get the slide deck, which we will send out to everybody, you'll have everybody on the call will have access to these additional resources. So I'm going to turn it now back to Victor and to Chantal and direct this question to you, Victor and Chantal. So if you were thinking about, you know, a place to start in this work, what would you suggest? And so, Victor, I'll go to you first. So what would be the most impactful strategy from your perspective?
Solidarity. I believe that we can't operate the way we've been operating for decades in this sector. There's a model of growth and more growth. And it's not growth with impact, it's just growth. And models of growth within a sector as fragile and as important as a nonprofit sector is problematic. I believe that we have to find ways and means to embed solidarity practices in all of our work. And that goes to our governance, to our operations, to how we adjudicate opportunities, how we assess our funders, our partners, how we onboard partners, how we meaningfully engage community. So for me, the most important thing is solidarity, finding ways and means to work together to ensure that everyone belongs, everyone's supported, and no one's left behind.
Thank you, Victor. Chantal, what about you?
Victor took the answer right out of my mouth. I was also going to say collaboration as well. I think it's important to think about how, you know, leaders and organizations have been acting in this space, and it's been fragmented. It's been difficult to pinpoint the different actors in this space and the organizations doing work. So I agree with Victor. I think going forward, the most impactful strategy is going to be collaboration. That means working with nonprofit organizations, grant makers, policy analysts, government, and technology experts to deliver the programs and solutions that we need to build the digital resilience of the sector.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting to hear both of your perspectives. With our final question, and then we're going to turn it over to some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, put it either in the chat or in the Q&A box. But I'm going to start with Narinder first, and then maybe throw it out to Amy next. What advice or reflections, Narinder, would you like to share with the folks that are on the call today about digital capacity, digital resilience, some of the points that other people might have made? What's some advice or some reflection?
So one would be to include it in your grant proposals, even if there's restrictions, because I know a lot of foundations have restrictions. You should add it in there and try to engage on a conversation. I was chatting with one of our grantees a few months ago, and they're bringing in this really cool software from the US to help with kinship matches that makes it so much more effective and efficient. And see, that is something that I'm getting excited about. So how can we mobilize our resources, our community, our network to support that type of a system? And I think you'd be surprised on how I think we foundations still have a ways to go, but I think there's more awareness on the importance of infrastructure and technology. So I would say it's like engage in those conversations or ask for the top up. I had another grantee who came to us saying, look, I have a Delta because I need to onboard the system in the next 3 years. Can you help? And we did. So I would say engage in those open conversations with funders and foundations, because you'd be surprised, I hope, on different creative ways in how folks with capital can support the sector.
Thank you for that. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, I agree with Narinder. I think the other piece of advice that I would give to nonprofit leaders is to get rid of the idea of your triangle shaped org chart, and that it has anything to do with technology conversations, because every single staff person needs to be trained. Every single staff person could be the one who is, close enough to the data to see the pattern, or the staff person who's able to see, actually, we could change this process and it would be easier on our community members, right? Like pretending that you have a certain job title that is making you qualified to be part of conversations on technology is holding us back. And so let go of that as your organizational culture and make sure everyone on staff is included.
Wow, thank you so much for to all of our panelists for your wisdom and sage advice. We're going to now open it up to a couple of questions that have appeared in the Q&A box. I can see a couple more popping up. Grace, do you want to bring a question forward from the Q&A box?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Liz. We have one from Jerry, who asks, how would impact measurement and management be positioned?
Okay, so where and how would impact measurement and management be positioned? So who would like to?
It looks like Jerry asked that quite early when you were sharing information, Liz, about the center and the working groups. And I wonder, Jerry, if your question was specific to like what working group would maybe be related to that topic. I don't know, Liz, if you have the list of working groups or anything like that handy to reference.
I don't. I'd have to scroll back through the PowerPoint to get back to that. But let me just pull it up in my files here really quickly, because I did print out, which you shouldn't do, because we should be also digitally enabled here. Yeah, I think, from my perspective, we haven't gotten to this level of detail with the working groups, and to some degree, the working groups are going to self-define their agendas and really identify what the priorities are. But certainly, impact measurement and management could be a flow through many of the working group topics, right? How does that happen? Maybe Amy, you could say within NTEN, because you have a history within NTEN in terms of working with multiple groups that are trying to advance the shared work of NTEN. Where does this show up with you?
Sure, and I read ahead, so I might actually answer this question by also answering Emily's question, which asked about expectations for the role, or people wanting to get involved, that sort of thing. So I think, because again, the center is really hoping to organize, convene, mobilize, and bring resources in through working groups. You can call them whatever you want to call them. We're calling them working groups. But that's a place where, regardless of which one you want, there's definitely opportunity to join a working group, multiple working groups. And I think conversations like impact measurement or management will naturally show up in the data working group, will naturally show up in the board governance group, right? Like there's a lot of different places where that conversation will come up. And then as center kind of facilitators, part of our role is to make sure that when conversations are happening concurrently, we're helping to connect those dots across working groups so that folks can build off of each other or collaborate, depending on what comes of that. So conversations are welcome in as many places as you want to have them, and lots of opportunities still. The work is just starting. It's not like working groups have already done. They've got their monthly meetings scheduled or anything like that. So definitely sign up on the website, indicate the topics that you're interested in, and that'll be the place where we'll kind of organize and convene people going forward.
Great, thanks, Amy. Anybody else want to weigh in, or should we go on to the next question?
I'll weigh in briefly. I think a lot of times when you look at impact, it's usually measured from the perspective of how do we ensure that we can access more resources from a funder, or how and so the lens sometimes is off. And I think that impact measurement has to have a few lenses: a social, racial, gender. It has to have multiple equity lenses. And then as well, it can't always be so forward facing. So for instance, the nonprofit sector, a lot of times, a lot of harm is done to staff within nonprofits. SETSI just finished an agreement with an organization, maybe about 8 months ago. And this organization was doing some remarkable work. And we came and support them around DEI, but 2 of their staff were being misgendered on a daily basis. So despite how great the work they're doing in the field, they were doing a lot of harm internally. So I think that the way we conceptualize value, the way we conceptualize impact has to have multiple lenses and has to have multiple facets and components, or it's performative and it's skewed towards how do we get more money, which is troublesome and just wrong.
And I think you're absolutely right about that, Victor. One of the lessons that we've learned at Tamarack is that there are also multiple contributors to impact, right? So, part of our work, some of the work that happens at Tamarack is around ending poverty. Well, we're not the only organization in that space. There are multiple organizations, multiple investors in that space. We make a contribution to that, but we also need to recognize the other folks that are in the space and how they're making contributions and validate that as well. And I think, that for me is a significant mindset shift, is to say, and I think it's part of what's driving the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, is to say that, this is a space where lots of people can contribute to the impact that we hope to achieve, over the longer term. So thank you for that, Victor. Grace, another question, please.
Yeah, so we have one here. It is, we are a funder, but we get our funding from the province. How do we promote technology infrastructure in our funded agencies when we are challenged to fund these? And how, as a funder, do we get creative in funding these things when we have restrictions on the funding we receive to redistribute?
I think maybe Narinder, we can direct that to you first, and then maybe have some others weigh in with some creative ideas, those of us that are accessing funding, but maybe start with you first.
Yeah, I think part of it is how we define what technology funding is. And if we define it as administrative, back-end, and not program funding, because it actually is enabling to programs. So I think the way you position that is going to matter, and it will give you a lot more flexibility. It's unfortunate, like we at the foundation, we have a model of essentially unrestricted capital, and it's unfortunate it's still a slower process to move more donors into that type of mindset. But I would say it's framing is one way to reframing it is one way to look at it.
Great, thank you so much. Chantal, Amy, Victor, anyone want to weigh into this question as well? So I see you nodding your head, Amy, so I'll turn it to you.
No, I was nodding because I was reading the other questions and trying to answer them in the chat.
Oh, okay. Okay, Chantal or Victor, any reflections about the funding question?
I think Narinder hit the nail on the head. Definitely, it has to be explicit, and there has to be some level of reciprocity on this. I agree with Narinder. I echo everything she said. Great,
thank you. We're coming to the end of our time. I know there's some other questions in either the chat or the Q&A. What we will commit to those of you that are on the call, we will take all of your questions, we'll circulate them to our panel, and in the post email that we send in the next week, we will answer your questions, or at least come up with as a good enough answer for now, recognizing that this is day 2 of the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, although not day 2 of technology and really utilizing technology to, move and advance our collective mission. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody who joined us today, but also thank you to my panel members. What a great conversation that we've had, and such great great wisdom and perspectives that you've brought to the conversation today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that are coming up at Tamarack in the next little while. So on May 5th, 12th, and 19th, Tamarack is hosting a virtual half day on each of those days conference called the Community Change Institute. We're really excited about this because it's an opportunity to meet with about 200 other change makers and to really dive into, you know, the interconnected practices related to community change. And so we've got lots of fun activities, amazing speakers. Victor is part of a panel on disruptive leadership. And so we're really excited to have Victor joining us again. We also have other events that are coming up, other events and workshops that are coming up. If for some reason you are unable to pay a workshop registration fee, there is a scholarship. So Tamarack has been the beneficiary of funding from other partners to enable people to access our learning events. So if you're a new professional, if you're an individual with lived and living experience, whether it's youth or poverty or other lived and living experience, or if you are supporting Indigenous-led and BIPOC organizations, please do reach out to us and find out about our scholarship opportunities, because we don't want to have funding be a barrier to you to learn with us. So welcome you to consider that as well. We also have foundations courses that we've launched at Tamarack. Again, scholarship opportunities with these as well. And the foundations courses are really an opportunity to build your skill sets in practices like community engagement, collective impact, deepening your understanding of poverty reduction, and foundations of participatory evaluation. And they're about a 6-hour commitment that you can do at your own pace. So again, lots of great things happening at Tamarack, and happy to provide these opportunities for you. In, as I mentioned, in a week, we will be sending you a full recording of the webinar, email with additional resources that folks have been putting into the chat box, and we'll pull a few more resources together for you. And we'll also be sending you a link to the audio so that you can share it with your colleagues if you'd like in your organizations, or with other colleagues that you think might be interested in listening to the audio version of this. So again, thank you so much, Amy, Narinder, Victor, Chantal. Thank you so much for being part of the panel today. I really appreciate the time that you've provided and the perspectives that you've provided. I think that it's exciting to be involved with the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. And thank you all for your leadership in this.
Thanks, Liz. Thank everybody.
Thank you so much, fam. Warm regards.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys. Bye everybody.